Hello, everyone, and welcome to this very special solo edition of Let's Talk Horses. My name is Sarah Watt. I am your host every week on this podcast. First of all, thank you so much for listening, for whether you've been listening for a long time or maybe this is the first time you've ever heard this podcast. I wanted to say thank you so much for being willing to listen to and receive a little bit about me and the world of horses and everything that they've created for me and the guests that I have on my podcast every week. So I've just returned home maybe 48 hours ago from an amazing 3-week adventure in Central America to a beautiful little country called Costa Rica. I spent just over 2 weeks of my time there at an amazing space called El Lugar that Gary Douglas, Dane here, and a bunch of people from Access Consciousness are contributing to creating. It's in a part of Costa Rica called Sarapiquí. So maybe like an hour and a half, depending on traffic, kind of northwest of San Jose, the capital of Costa Rica. So it's amazingly accessible and easy to get to. I mean, coming from Australia, I flew there. I've been there a bunch of times before, but basically this podcast has been designed as a bit of a wrap up of that trip because it was very much a horse adventure. And, you know, this podcast is just going to be released in a few hours. I really put off recording this for some reason. And, you know, I was thinking just now about still like, do I want to do this? Because really, I think sometimes it's difficult to put something quite so magical into words, and especially without getting too significant here, but the profound amount of change that I've experienced from these couple of weeks in this part of the world sort of left me a little bit hesitant to create a podcast and try and talk about it. But here I am. I'm still a little bit scattered from the journey, definitely in a billion pieces from the change. You know, I don't have all of my hair and makeup in place for this episode. I chucked a jacket on over the top of a singlet, made myself a beautiful iced coffee and put my big girl pants on and thought, let's sit down and do my best to give you guys a download, hopefully a very energetic, wrapped in verbal download of the time I've just spent in this amazing part of the world. So this is very much going to be a shameless plug for El Lugar, this space that's being created in Costa Rica. It's been called many things, a resort, an eco-resort, but it's one of those magical things that really defies description. And also the Conscious Horse, Conscious Rider class that I did there with my amazing co-facilitators, Alison Cox and Cody Law. Yeah, and really just to invite you guys, anyone listening to this, to have more magic in your life. I think I was just having a lengthy conversation with my partner, Hayden, who's away working in Melbourne at the moment, just talking a little bit about the space I'm in at the moment, because I definitely am feeling more weird than I have ever felt at any other point in my life. And, you know, it was interesting being in a place like El Lugar, being in a country like Costa Rica, but I think really it's what is being created specifically in this space that is El Lugar, and then returning home to where I live on the Sunshine Coast, which is also in its own right a beautiful, magical place full of peace and space. But it was so interesting for me flying in and landing at the Sunshine Coast Airport and getting in the car and coming home and just really seeing, and you know, I was only gone for 3 weeks, so it wasn't like a huge amount of time, but just that nothing really changed here. Like everything was sort of the same, and you go somewhere and you experience many things over a period of time, and then you return to the place that you call home, and it's like, it's like you've just stepped, you know, back in time to when you left in a way, but you've changed so much, but the things around you haven't. Well, they have, but maybe just not on the scale of how it feels to you. So I just wanted to share maybe a couple of tools with you guys about that, but also just what I've come back with now that the dust has settled a little bit and is still settling in my world, and what I'm actually looking at creating and asking for in my life post this amazing weeks, just in a constant and huge volume of magic and change. So I remember a long time ago at a 6-day, there was a lady that sort of said to Gary, you know, because a 6-day event, Access Consciousness also does these. We used to do them all around the world a few times a year, but at the moment we're doing one per year, and they're in Lugar, and the next one actually starts in about 10 days. So if you're hearing this podcast and there is anywhere in your world that I can invite you to look at that possibility, I mean, there's a bunch of prerequisites you would have had to have done. So you're probably someone, if you're hearing this, you know you have the possibility to go, as in you've done enough access, you know about the 6-day. But if there is anywhere where you're sitting on the fence, or possibly you've registered to be online and there's any possibility to go live, this is me gently and not so gently pushing you off that fence and being an invitation for you to get your butt to Lugar, basically. But it was at one of these 6-day events that this lady sort of said, you know, I used to leave these 6-day events because it's a very similar feeling. You're immersed in magic, like geographically, like we always chose places to do these classes that were very special, special parts of the planet. Being in Lugar, it's like the epitome of that. But we used to do them in a bunch of other amazing places as well. So you were sort of immersed in this magnificent physical environment, but also going through a whole bunch of change during one of these 6-day freeform classes. And, you know, this lady was like, I used to go home and be like, oh, how am I going to deal with the world? And then she's like, but you know what? Now I ask the question, how is the world going to deal with me? And I loved that. That was something where I was like, fuck yeah, like that should be, and it's not to be in a confrontational way, but it's more like, hey, I've changed. I've stepped into this whole bunch of change. I'm not going to go back or slow down or anything for anyone. So what if it was less a question of how the hell am I going to deal with all of this, and more like, hey, how is everything else going to deal with me? And being that catalyst of change, being a catalyst of invitation, walking through the world and having this place where, whether people choose to or not, you don't shut down any of the change that you've gone through. And, you know, whether you've done something like this, had a life-changing adventure to a part of the world, attended some sort of class or seminar that completely changed you as a person, especially if it's access consciousness, you'll know what I'm talking about. You'll know what I mean when you then have this pivotal moment where you're like, okay, do I amalgamate myself back into the space that I left, or do I blow that whole space apart and be whatever this change is actually inviting me to? So yeah, it took me a while, and I'm grateful for Hayden for just listening, because sometimes when you have a chance to talk about things, you actually discover a lot of stuff for yourself. So yeah, just realizing really how much change, like a profound amount of change without being really significant about it, that I went through on this trip. And, you know, looking then when you come to your home, and whether you live in your home all the time, whether you do travel the world a lot, whether the world is your home, or whether you have a few homes in the world, like you have a space or spaces where you take on like the comfortability of you, like I guess the personality that you've given yourself based on, you know, all of your life and who you are and how you show up every day. But you come away from something like this and it's like, okay, so I have the choice to like do that whole amalgamate back into that space thing, or the choice to really be brave and see what's possible beyond it. And I know I've been in this space before, like where I've been at this point of like, everything is so different. And I think To be completely honest, I've only ever been willing to take on like a little bit of that change and make it a part of me, the personality, the thing that is Sarah Watt in the world. And what I've started looking at just now, like literally in the last few hours, is like, what if I was willing to just not do that? Like really let the pieces lie where they are and not try and put them back together, and just see what happens next. Like be the question. And there's so many tools in Access Consciousness that is really there to give us the tools, the ammunition, the power, whatever you want to call it, to be able to create a life like that. But I don't think I've ever really been willing to explore what that looks like. Or if I did, I've sort of already had an expectation of what that was. So yeah, this is my Dear Diary podcast to tell you guys all about how much change is truly available out there if you're willing to go and seek it out and find it and use it and have it as part of your life. And I think the thing that I brought back from this trip with me the most is really the demand now to have way more of this magic in my life all the time. Because you go to a place like Costa Rica where it's very different, and especially El Lugar, it's like a bubble of magic, really. Like it's like a whole different reality. Like it's a whole different reality to what is going on outside of that space. And part of it is Costa Rica, the land. Part of it is the horses that I spent a hell of a lot of time with while I was there. And part of it, a big part, is what Gary and Access and everyone has contributed to creating within that space that is El Lugar, the eco resort, the resort, whatever you want to call it. And what I'm looking at is like, what if that was really what was available to us all the time? Like, what if it was like you could have that level of magic and possibilities in your world, in your bubble, as small or as big as your bubble is, like whether it's here on the Sunshine Coast or wherever I am in the world. And I looked at that as well, because what I think is created in El Lugar, again, along with the land of Costa Rica, the people, definitely the people there as well, and 1,000,000,000% the horses, is a place where the tools of access really come to life. Like there really is a level of trust that you have with yourself and the land. Like you really have this sense of having your own back. There is so much more available where time doesn't exist, where judgment doesn't exist, like all of these things that I think really, if you're any sort of seeker in this world, any sort of person that's navigating a path where you want something different, like that meandering path to consciousness, like whatever it is for you, spirituality, whatever that is, the seeking of something bigger and greater than just you and this reality that you've been given so far. I think we're all actually looking for that. And I think what I've realized is that was sort of shown to me in these 3 weeks, just over 2 weeks that I was there. And maybe it was shown to me now because now's the time that I can actually have that as my, or part of my reality. So I'll leave that tendril of conversation or words, because I think that's kind of as much as I can say about it right now. And I'll switch over to talking a little bit more about the horses there and that part of my travel. But yeah, I really invite you guys to start looking at like if the things that you've been seeking in your life were now available to you right now, what would your day look like? What would you choose differently than when you thought you had to be seeking them? Like, what if you found them? Like, what if you had that treasure chest in front of you with the magic, the lost time thing, the loss of judgment thing, like this place where everything became a 10-second choice or even less. yeah, what would your life, the creation of your life every day start to look like? Because I was listening also to a call this morning with Gary Douglas and Simone Milasas called The Creative Edge of Consciousness, which is another amazing thing available within Access. It's like a membership where you pay, I don't know, $150 a month maybe. And you get a call every month and all this other stuff. It's amazing. And something that Gary said in the call was, you use choice to create living. Living is an action. Like, how often do we wake up and our day is already in some way predetermined about, you know, this portion of my day will be this and that portion of my day will be that. But where what I would like to start stepping into now is more this space of the action of creating my life. And for me, a few examples of that are like being willing to just go somewhere that I've never been before. And I mean, I live on the Sunshine Coast, Queensland, Australia, and I was born here actually. I've moved around a lot. I've traveled a lot. I've lived in different parts of Australia, but just using the Sunshine Coast as an example, because in my 42 or so years on this planet, probably, I don't know, let's say 27 of them have been spent in this part of the world. But there are so many parts of just this part of the world that I've never seen, in like, I've never put these eyes on and these hands on and these feet on. So like, even having that thing of like, what if today I went somewhere that I've never been before and saw through my eyes trees or whatever it is for you. Like, it could be buildings or art or something that you've never laid your eyes upon before. And just that level of your life becoming about the choice for action, and that action being the choice and the magic. Yeah, so I know I was going to stop talking about that, but there you go. I kept talking about it. And I think it's just because it's helping me to figure it out a little bit as well. But yeah, my big invitation to you, and to you being also to me, the person I'm looking at on my screen right now, is to start having more of that. Like, what at the core, the very essence of you brings you joy, and starting to discover those things, not for any reason. Like, I even looked at, I started learning Spanish, and, you know, I don't know about you guys, but I find I start a lot of things and don't necessarily finish them. I have this kind of cycle, this pattern that I go through where, and, you know, it's definitely not to make that wrong in any sense, because I think it's also a very humanoid characteristic, you know, the people I talked about, like us, that are seeking, that are on this path. So it's not to make any of that wrong. But I started looking at, well, why, quote unquote, did I choose that thing in the first place? And, you know, even looking at Spanish, like to learn the Spanish language, I was like, well, I should learn it because I want to be able to speak it when I go to Costa Rica. And I want to know another language. But what if it wasn't about there being any reason? It was just about the sheer joy of immersing myself in something that at my very core brings me joy. And so I started looking at, like, what are the things that for no reason I just want to know more about? And, you know, one of them is like plant medicine and plants, and how, you know, the things that we have available on this planet can be nourishing to our bodies as food, but as medicine and stuff like that, you know, to grow things in my yard that I can learn about that occur so naturally on this planet, but I don't actually know a lot about that. So anyway, that's my other invitation, is to start to explore things that bring you at your very core so much joy, and they're not having to be absolutely any reason whatsoever to go there, to explore it. Like, you don't need to tell anyone. There's not a necessity to post it on social media. There's not a necessity to update people on what's going on. And you could do that as well, but really to like get, I want to say, like, down to the rawness. But I don't really know how else to say it. But this, and magic is definitely the word, because I think magic is such a raw energy. Like, it's a raw element of creation. Yeah. And to get to that place where you get to explore the magic that is you. And I think this nicely segues into horses, because for me, I know the times that I'm doing horses from a place of like result, expectation, whatever, and the times when I'm being with horses just because it literally is something that makes me so much more joyful at my very core. And that's like, after this podcast, I'm going to go and I haven't seen my horses for a few weeks, and I haven't really had the energy to be out there with them until today. And I'm like, I'm going to go and just be with them and probably wash them, maybe take them for a little walk up the road, get out and explore with them a little bit, but just do it for the sheer joy of it, not because of anything, not because I haven't seen them, not because they've been in their paddock for a few weeks. I mean, they are all kind of byproducts of what might show up, but really to just go down there and just be with them and see what shows up. Yeah. And I do want to talk a little bit, and in the coming weeks as well, this podcast, and I know this isn't really how I had envisaged this podcast to go when I first told my team, hey, I'll do the podcast on my own this week, and I'll do a bit of a wrap up of Costa Rica and a wrap up of the class. This wasn't my intended, I guess, dialect for this podcast, but it never shows up the way you think it's going to. That's another tool in Access Consciousness that has helped me so much. I just totally lost my train of thought, because I also started thinking about, even with Access Consciousness, how much I'm down a rabbit hole now, people, but even with Access Consciousness, how much I've taken those tools and tried to use them in a way that blah, 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 like to have a result, or because that's how they should be used, and really now just looking at like what's possible now, even with the tools of Access, which I've been a part of for probably like 10 years in my life, like what's truly available, approaching that more from this space of like it being very rawly and very to the core of me. Yeah, because we're not really, like, each one of us is so very, very individual and different from each other, but most of us have built our lives based on other people, really. Like, and maybe I'm wrong. I guess I'm talking more about myself here, but I look at my life and I'm like, really, like, I remember Simone Millisser saying once, who do you think of before you choose? And I'm like, well, pretty much fucking everyone else. And even if you don't think you do, like really look at every choice you make and think if there's anyone else that comes into your awareness at all before you make that choice. And our lives are made up of a series of choices. Like where I'm sitting here right now, 1:34 p.m. on September the 26th, Thursday, I think. I'm here right now based on every single choice I made preceding this very moment. And if even half of those choices, but I'm going to say most of those choices were made somehow considering someone or something else, like how much have I missed the opportunity to truly dive into and find and discover myself? And even looking at the things that make up my life, you sort of break your life into components: my career, my relationship, my home. I don't have children. For me, it's my animals, travel, like these things. And in each of those segments of your life, you may or may not, but I do have had a clear benchmark for success. And if I looked at it, and your body as well, definitely put that one in there. And I look at it and I'm like, well, essentially I'm successful in every area based on however I built that area. But it's like, why do I feel dissatisfied then? Why am I not like literally over the moon with happiness with this life that I've created? And in most ways I am, but there's still something that I'm discovering these last couple of days that I want to say is like a gap. It's something that's missing in that. And I think when I sat and actually when I was talking to Hayden about it, it was like, it was this magic that I had in Costa Rica where none of that stuff really mattered in the moment. Yeah. So I'm going off on so many tangents on this podcast, and I'm so happy because it's really helping me as well. So now it's like, okay, so whatever I've chosen to get to where I am right now, what if this was truly the very beginning of choice and what was truly possible for me, Sarah Watt, in this lifetime, for however much longer I'm here in this body? Like, what if this was just the beginning of what was possible? And what if I really started to discover my choices for me? And if I really didn't consider, well, not that I don't consider anyone else, because I care so much about everyone and everything, but what if it was more like discovering the things that are truly me? Like, who am I? Who am I today, and what grand and glorious adventures will I have? Who am I for the next minute, and what grand and glorious adventures will I have? So yeah, anyway, again, I'm going to end that thread and try my best to get to the horses. But if you also notice, horses are everywhere, and they're part of everything that you're willing to allow them to be a part of. And in the coming weeks, I'm going to have guests on the show from the class that we had there. So next week, my brother, Brandon Watt, will be on. I think I've got David Kubis on. He was in the Conscious Horse class. Let's see if we can get a few more people, because I'd love to hear their side of what was, well, I'd love to know from their side about El Lugar and Costa Rica, and also the class and the horses there, just to have this energy available in the world. And if no one hears it, or if a million people hear it, I don't really care. I think there's something about just being willing to be the energy of something. And if it shows up as words for now, then that's fine. But just having this out in the world now as a living entity, organism, creation, whatever that is. So when I got to Costa Rica, when I got to El Lugar, I was fully expecting to ride my horse, Pregonero. And because I arrived really late at night, I think I got in at midnight, and I rode the next morning, there were a lot of things from the beginning when I got there that weren't, like, my expectation was here and it was completely different. And that in itself is such a great place to be in, to challenge the expectations you have, because everywhere you have an expectation, you are automatically diminishing your capacity to receive, because everything that doesn't meet that expectation, you're either going to take as like a disappointment, or you're not even going to see it. Or if that expectation is met, everything that could have been possible if it wasn't met is also going to be missed or not seen. So when I got there, I didn't realize, in somewhere in my world, I thought the bridge had been rebuilt. The bridge that joins the two of the properties in El Lugar together came down maybe earlier this year. And, you know, I knew that it was in the process of being built, but somewhere in my world, the bridge was built and we were crossing that bridge and we were going to the horses on the other side like we always had. But no, when I got there, we went to this other place. I'm like, where the heck are we? Oh, we catch a boat. And if you go onto my Instagram page, magic, like you get in this little boat every day and you go down the river to the other side. And that's where you get out to go up and meet the horses. So find it on my Instagram page. I did one of my amazing social media creators created a reel from some videos I took there. And I walked up on the other side, and my horse Pregonero is very obvious because he's a pinto. He's he's white with big black spots, and there's no other pintos like him in El Lugar. So I was looking and looking, and he wasn't there. And Simone said, "Oh no, you can't. His cancer has come back." So I was like, "Fuck!" Like my world straight away was like, "Whoa." But I was sort of like, okay, I can't really deal with that right now because I'm about to ride a horse. And if you know anything about riding horses, the worst thing you can do is get on a horse freaking out about something, because it's not going to make for a nice ride for you or for the horse. So I sort of like left that to the side, and rode a beautiful mare called Canela, which means cinnamon in Spanish. And it was just like every ride in El Lugar, if you're not laughing, you're dead, basically. Like this horse, and I'll find some footage of her as well and post that. she was just, and a lot of the horses there are very small. Like in Australia, this podcast is going to go forever, because in Australia, there's so many points of view about horses and a lot of the rest of the world. You know, she's probably 14 hands, 14-1, 14-2, something like that. I'm tall. I'm 6 foot tall. Most people would not even dream about putting me on a horse any smaller than at least 15 hands, and a big horse. And Costa Senseis, which are the horses we ride there, are fine. They've got fine bones. They've got small shoulders. They've got little bums. Very different to my horses here in Australia. Yeah, but I rode this horse, and it was the best ride I've ever had on a horse so far that day. And then as soon as I got off and we went back to the other side, I went to see my horse Pregonero, who, this horse I've talked about a lot on my podcasts. He came to me through asking for something that I never thought was possible, which was to own a horse in Costa Rica. And I literally actualized and asked that I never thought I would ever be able to actualize. And I did it just by asking for it and being willing to receive it. And this horse showed up. And the first day I met him, I'm going to try not to cry. Like I just touched him and he showed me energetically something that I'd never experienced before. It was like we were, it's going to sound a little bit woohoo and significant, but it was like we were in this universe flying through outer space together, but not together. Like it was just, I touched him and just, and so from that moment, this horse was my horse. Like, and I've talked about him a lot on this podcast, and you guys have all seen so many photos of him on my Instagram. And when I saw him last year in October at the 6th day, he had a sore on his bottom, like right where his tail comes down. He has his bum here, and there was a sore there. And I was like, oh, what's that? And they were like, because, you know, there's a lot of language barrier in Costa Rica. Plus, horses in Costa Rica are treated very differently to horses around the world. They don't treat them like pets. They're treated like animals, like working animals. They love them in their own way of loving them, but very differently to how I love my horses here in Australia. But I found out he had a type of skin cancer that had come in on his bottom. But, you know, everyone was like, it's going to be fine. We're going to operate. They removed it. I got a follow-up photo and sort of information that he was doing well after the surgery. So in my world, I'm like, everything's fine. And then I got there and found out that in fact it wasn't fine, and that it was very not fine. And I went to see him straight after that ride and saw that his body had brought this cancer back, and it was highly like aggressive, I would say. What was a small wound, maybe the size of like, I don't know, a 20-cent piece here in Australia, was now like half of a cut cantaloupe or rock melon, whatever part of the world you're in, sitting right above his bottom where he needs to poo every few hours. Horses poo a lot. And it was festering and smelly. And without going into detail, you can see some videos on my Instagram page as well. But yeah, so then I was all of a sudden gone from this expectation of riding my horse for the next 2 weeks while I was there to my horse having basically terminal cancer. Like, you know, I saw the vet there, and what he told me was not very good news about my horse. And so I started going through this process of like choosing what was going to be the future for him. You know, I've left Costa Rica now. I'm at home, obviously, and I'm not going to be back there for 5 months. So it was really this question of, do I allow my horse to go on living like this and hope that in 5 months he's alive and not in like a world of pain when I get back? Or do I ask him questions and give his body the choice to leave? So I'm not going to go too deeply into that, because I think we're actually going to do a separate podcast on this. But spoiler alert, I chose to have him put to sleep. And that all happened on the day before I came home here to Australia, like hours before I was due to get on my plane and leave, which was a whole intense and beautiful experience unto itself. So I'm going to leave that bit, because I think we'll do a podcast and really talk about that, because it was like, there was the process leading up to it about really being with an animal, like a non-verbal creature that can't tell you how they're feeling, and how you make that choice for them to, end their life in this body, and what that was like. And to add to that, I also did have a 22-year-old Costa Sensei called Inversor. And Inversor first belonged to Gary Douglas, who then gifted him to my brother, Brendan Watt. And the first time I met this horse, and this will be another podcast as well, my brother was riding him and Brendan got off, and I said to Brendan, that horse never leaves our family now. Not going to cry again. I said, if you can ever not take care of him anymore, I get to take care of him, because I will do, like, these two horses, I would sell everything I own to take care of them, to make sure they were okay. And Brendan gave Inversor to me for my birthday last year or the year before. I think it was the year before, 2022. And Inversor was about 22 years old, and based on some things with how he was cared for and the shoes that he had put on, he had calcification of his pedal bones in both of his front feet. So he was lame to the extent, I think I just got to ride him once, that he was my horse, and then we retired him. And for an animal that is like geared and made to be a working animal, they don't retire very well. I mean, I saw him and he just looked like skin and bones and sunburnt face. Anyway, basically I chose to have him put to sleep as well. So fast forwarding, and spoiler alert there too. So I started my journey in Costa Rica with my two horses. A few days in, Gary Douglas gifted me a horse. This was before any of this other stuff. Like, this universe just works in such miraculous ways. I rode a horse for Gary. He rode this horse and said, this horse is too much for me. Sarah, can you ride him and see what you can do with him? I rode this horse and was like, I don't know about you guys, but I find it very hard not to fall in love with every single horse I ride. Like, the horses I rode while I was in Costa Rica, 1, 2, 3. Like, I probably rode about 6 or 7 different horses, and I could easily own all of them. Like, I was like, I love you. Like, I love you so much. And I continue to contribute to all of them. But this one particular horse, I got on him, and he was almost like, sorry, Gary, but I'm Sarah's horse. And he saw me on him and literally called me the next morning and said, I want you to have this horse. And he gifted him to me. His name is Calixto. Again, if you visit my social media, you will see him on there. I introduce him. And so all of a sudden I had 3 horses in Costa Rica. So this girl is like on cloud 9. And then I leave and I have 1 horse in Costa Rica now. So this podcast has already gone for 40 minutes, and I know most of it wasn't really talking about horses. But I hope from this, you guys have taken some cool shit away. I know my life is never going to be the same again, in a way that I'm very excited to keep exploring. And the most weird and uncomfortable I've ever been in my whole life. And I would love to invite you to come back and visit. I mean, like I said, I record tomorrow with my brother, and that will go live next Thursday. I'm sure we will talk about all of my horses, his horses, the class. And then I think I'll do an episode maybe where someone can ask me some questions about having animals put to sleep like that. It's the first time I've ever done it with a horse, and I refuse to not be a part of every single part of it. I was in the mud. It was raining. The cowboys there hand dug a hole that was 5 foot deep in the ground. Hand dug it. It took them 4 hours, and they stood there and dug that hole into the deep, muddy clay for my horses. And anyway, that will be an episode for another day. I was with the vet the whole time. And the thing I fucking love about El Lugar and Costa Rica, and I can't say Costa Rica because the most part I've seen of Costa Rica is the properties that we've been there with Access Consciousness, but they don't hide anything from you. Like, I was like, I took my shoes off because I had my Crocs from Australia here, because we were walking in mud and sinking, a foot into the ground. And putting a horse to sleep it's a big thing. Like, it's this big animal that goes from standing to needing to drop down to the ground. But there was no point where they were like, Sarah, you need to step back here. I was part of all of it. And for that, it was so intense and so beautiful to be there, to be able to say goodbye, and to be there and hold them both for their last breaths in the bodies that they have. So that will be an episode of its own. So I don't know, stay tuned. We'll tell you, or you'll find out about it somewhere. But thank you for listening. Thank you for following me on my random Dear Diary podcast, talking about these 3 weeks of immense and I want to say catastrophic change that I've just been through. And I'm excited about what the future holds for me. And if there's any part of that I can invite you guys to have for you, that's probably really the only reason I would even talk about it. Otherwise, I'm going to go out now with my horses and just be with them and see what shows up. So thank you so much. I will see you next week. Bye-bye.